Hello, everyone. Welcome to Transform Now. I'm Brad Hairston.
And I'm Michael Marchuk.
And this is our weekly pulse check, taking a look at all the exciting things going on in the world of automation and AI. Michael, let's take a look at three articles. All have a very heavy AI flavor to them, but they're all interesting in and of themselves. The first article comes from TechCrunch, and it's titled, Governor Newsom Vetoes California's Controversial AI Bill, SB 1047. Now, this is referring to the bill that was recently brought forward to him. It had been approved in their state government, and it would have made companies that develop AI models liable for implementing safety protocols to prevent critical harms. And there were some criteria around this. It wouldn't have applied to every AI company under the sun, but certainly the big ones would have been held to this standard. And some would say this is a shock that Governor Newsom, who is no friend to Silicon Valley, that he would actually veto a bill to regulate these companies. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I think he did the right thing in terms of vetoing this particular bill. Now, if I look back and just generally talk about AI regulation, I think there's a balance that has to be struck between innovation and protections, because as we all see, we can do a whole lot of stuff with AI, and the companies that are producing it right now don't necessarily have any liability for the activities that they're doing. So I think bringing in some kind of governance from the perspective of how these tools are applied and some responsibility that's applied back to the folks who are building them is important. I think this particular case, this particular bill that was brought forward, based on the way that it was worded and the way that the application of the fines and the bill itself would be applied to the companies was not necessarily all that well thought through in its entirety. It was very broad and sweeping in terms of, hey, if you do anything along these lines here, this could be a problem. We're going to make this go, make you personally liable for all the stuff that's bad and happening. It's, again, good intention, but poor implementation. Yeah. And I think the bill or something like it will return at some point, where they've taken into account some of the flaws that were in this current regulation and return to be able to see if they can pass something that's similar, but maybe more targeted for organizations who are developing these particular models. So again, it's a whole balance between innovation and governance in terms of the way that we legally protect our citizens and protect our data, and it has to be a balance. It just has to be a balance, right? To make sure that we are moving things forward without harming.
Yeah, and the article notes that Newsom has already signed 17 to 18 bills regulating AI companies. So he's not opposed to putting some guardrails and constraints around AI.
Right.
But this one felt a little bit more stringent and went a little bit too far. In fact, I'll give the quote from him. He says, "This bill applies stringent standards to even the most basic functions, so long as the large system deploys it. I do not believe this is the best approach to protecting the public from real threats posed by the technology." Now, that sounds like a statement that maybe was written by ChatGPT. So, but who knows? He clearly got a lot of advisory support from Silicon Valley and from people he trusts and people that are in the AI industry. And I think they were all pretty much in unison telling him that this one went way too far. So it makes sense. Makes sense that he would have said no to this one. All right. So our next article is from Digital Native, which is a a blog post. It's got some very interesting articles in it. And the article that we're focusing on is titled AI's Privilege Expansion: How AI Expands Access to Expensive, Hard to Get Services. Now, we've talked about this, I think, more than once on this podcast and elsewhere. Just this idea of technology expanding access to goods or services that previously were too expensive or just difficult to access. So it's certainly one of the arguments that gets made for new technology, and in this case, AI. But what did you think about this post? It went into a lot of great detail. It was a long article or blog post, and it brought a lot of different aspects of society into it. It wasn't just focusing on one or two. So tell me your thoughts, Michael.
Well, I'm going to only focus on one or two because there were so many. So part of it, he started off with describing one of the Robert Frost poems, and describing how he wanted to find out what it really meant. And so he did a Google search and found a couple of different blog posts that describe one thing or another that he felt were like, no, this is probably not the best analysis of the poem. And so he went and asked ChatGPT, which then broke it down very simply and straightforward and provided both different context and what is appearing to be the ChatGPT explanation for the meaning of the poem. And so as part of that, his idea was, well, bringing a very complex type of topic in terms of, in this case here, I would say it's interpretation of art or interpretation of authors' meanings, etc., to bring it to a very simplified version of that to allow someone to understand what could be meant by that art or that author. This is something that really opened up access for people who may not have either the time or the desire to get into that kind of detail. So that's one aspect of it. I want to take that thread and move a little further, though, because he also applied it to the costs of goods and services as we've gone over the years. And he had a chart that went back to like 1997 and plotted a bunch of different things on the chart and said, well, what's about the same price as it was back in 1997 in inflated dollars and whatnot, versus what's more expensive and what's less expensive. And no surprise that all of the computer software, TVs, et cetera, were much less expensive. But also no surprise that the college tuition, medical care were all much more expensive, right?
Yeah.
And based on the first component we talked about with the AI interpreting a poem, to this one, his basic thesis is that these human-centric services have gotten so much more expensive. And then because they're so much more expensive, they're less likely to be accessible for those who can't afford them. So bringing in an AI tutor, for example, or an AI teacher can help, make that more accessible, make these very complex subjects now accessible to people who can't necessarily afford to go to the most expensive universities and get the best teachers. So this really does extend or expand the capabilities. In fact, I talked about this with Alex DeRitter in a previous podcast. He went into detail based on the same thing, that he has been doing the same thing with his son, getting tutoring. And that tutoring function itself is now available via AI. And AI is the most patient tutor you can have in now with some of the emotional capabilities that we're seeing evolve. Let's say evolve. It's not evolving. They're being programmed in. Should be able to build in this emotional capability to AI to respond in a way that's very caring and compassionate. It looks a lot like having one of your best teachers that you remember from your past who was caring and took your learning very seriously and helped you understand multiple different ways. So an AI is never going to leave you in the lurch that way and get upset that you're asking for the 40th time, I don't understand this, can you maybe explain it in a different way? So there's really now this capability to extend all of this education and educational capabilities to folks who may not be able to either afford it or have access to it. And there's slightly different things. If you in the United States here go into the Appalachian Mountains, notoriously a very poverty-stricken area. And because of that, they generally don't have the best teachers or the best education in that area. Versus if you go into Connecticut and you have these private schools, they have the best teachers. They have a very low class size. And because of that, the kids are getting very, very, personalized attention. Well, now we can level that playing field by leveraging AI, where the folks, no matter where they are, whether they're in the United States or not, they're able to get the same access to that kind of education and provide that very patient tutoring to allow them to understand, which then can basically, like a tide, raise all boats, allowing people who didn't have this access now to be able to contribute and maybe allow their imagination and inspiration to be felt in areas where they couldn't have done it before.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder what would OpenAI's rate of adoption been if they hadn't made ChatGPT free right out of the gate, right? I mean, they're the fastest technology to get to 100 million users, within 90 days, I think it was. But I think they made a really good, educated bet that if they made it free initially, that this would get so many more people from around the world looking at it, exploring it, taking advantage of it. So they kind of led the way. Now, of course, they're going to a for-profit model. So we'll see how much longer they have a free interface to their technology. And one other thing to add here, I think it was one of our first pulse checks that we did. We covered an article about will.i.am, Black Eyed Pea fame, and he's been touting AI for quite a while. He's one of the only performing artists in that industry that's so high on it, but it's largely because of this subject. He believes it is opening the door to providing better education, better healthcare, better legal services, and the list goes on. And a lot of those were covered in this blog as well, by just the nature of the technology and the accessibility to it and the ease of use. So a lot of people out there really that feel passionate about this, and this the author of this article is certainly one of them. So absolutely thought it was good. Okay, the last article is from Business Wire, and it's touching on a new Accenture report that I think is pretty interesting. And the title is New Accenture Research Finds That Companies with AI-Led Processes Outperform Peers. Now, we've heard that before. That's not new. And certainly their most recent research supports that finding. But there were some other things they talked about in here that I thought were kind of interesting. And I'll let you start first and talk about what you liked and what you found intriguing. And then I'll kind of come back with maybe some things you didn't find interesting as well. But why don't you start us off?
Well, we've been hearing all about this, taking AI and automation from an efficiency standpoint. And, we've seen cost reductions, and you can only efficiency your way so far into growth, right? So what I'm finding, though, based on this research, is that they were saying, based on their poll of 2,000 leaders, that organizations that are taking this forward are seeing a 2.5 times higher average revenue growth than those who are lagging in adoption of AI and automation, just in general. So again, these are big generalities, but the idea behind it is this really isn't about cost cutting. It's about how can we grow what we have, grow our organization, and grow our people to be able to accomplish the goals that we've set forth. And a part of this, the article also talked about not only the growth, but also identifying whether you're ready to do this, because many organizations, and I know you and I have talked with many that are like this, are desiring this, but they're just not ready yet. And it's not because there's not a desire. It's really the fact that there's so many pieces in place that need to be changed or adjusted to be able to adopt this at scale. And the article does go into some of this in terms of how these operations can be transformed or changed, and some things to look out for, which reminded me very much of of an enterprise operating model that you and I have been working out
Mhm.
for a while that describes this. And I think that's really important to understand that AI adoption is so much more than simply, are we ready to put the technology into use? Do we have enough GPUs in place?
Yeah.
Even if is our data clean, right? Those are very technical aspects to implementing this particular kind of tool. But you and I both know that there's way more to it that has a lot more to do with culture and the people involved. So
Right.
that's what I've seen. But tell me what you're seeing in this article.
Well, one of those points you mentioned is definitely caught my attention as well. They of the executives they interviewed and surveyed, 78% indicated that AI and generative AI are advancing too fast for their organization's training efforts to keep pace. So clearly, most organizations, at least if take this as a representative sample, are struggling to keep up. It's changing so fast, and it just takes more time to get your organization acclimated, get them using it the right way. They also found that 2/3 of the organizations surveyed said that they just struggle to change the way they operate. So they can get the generative AI up and running, but it's hard to get an organization to change what they do day to day and to use it effectively and to replace things that they've always done, to get rid of those manual activities that Gen AI can do so much better. So that's all the time we have for this week's Pulse Check. Thanks for joining us. Remember, we publish another podcast every week with a great guest. So be sure and check that out, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.